The notification appeared on my phone just as the sliding doors of the tram closed. A single sentence from the family broadcast thread sat on the screen like a cold fingerprint. Dinner begins at 6:45. Don't be late again. Beneath it, a photo, the long oak table at my mother's house. Every chair filled except one, the seat where I had sat at every holiday since childhood. No one had told me they changed the time. No one had reminded me of the dinner at all. It wasn't forgotten. It was arranged without me. That by the time I reached my apartment in Portbridge, another message lit the screen. A digital invoice for $31,900. No greeting attached. No explanation. Just an attachment with my sister's name on it, Staliasand. A note added by my father. Please settle this immediately. The damage is extensive. I stood in the narrow entryway, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. The quiet felt strangely thick, like the walls were listening. I read the message again, slower this time. They hadn't included me in the dinner, but somehow they still expected me to pay for whatever mistake Talia had made. It wasn't surprising, and yet the brazenness of it pulled something taut inside my chest. Growing up in the Vallon household meant learning the choreography of silence. My father, Lionel Vallon, believed that talking too much revealed weaknesses. Commands were fine. Praise was unnecessary. Explanations were indulgent. My mother, Orla, smoothed the razor edges he left behind, but always from the sidelines. She was a quiet kind of caretaker, stitching peace into corners no one noticed except her. And then there was my younger sister, Talia. 2 years beneath me, but always 2 steps ahead in his eyes. She moved through rooms as if the air parted just for her. When I was 9, I dragged a malfunctioning drone from the garage into the kitchen, determined to understand why it kept spinning out midair. The little thing jittered on the table like a trapped insect. I had no handbook, no tools beyond a screwdriver I borrowed from my father's workbench, but it was the first time I felt something that belonged entirely to me. Lionel walked in with his coat still on, carrying the sharp scent of winter. He didn't ask what I was doing. He didn't come closer. He glanced once at the open drone, then at me. Pointless, he muttered, hanging his keys on the wall hook. Fixing scraps won't take you anywhere. Clean up before you scratch the table. Behind him, Talia slipped into the room holding a watercolor painting. She had finished that morning a field of wildflowers that didn't exist in our neighborhood. Daddy, look, she said, bright and perfect. He smiled. A real one. Beautiful work, he praised, tapping her nose with one finger. You've always had a natural eye. His voice had never sounded like that with me. I rested my hand on the drone, as if I could hide the sting under my palm. Within minutes, I had closed it up and carried it back to the garage. That night, a quiet understanding settled into me like dust. I wasn't the one he expected to shine. When I turned 16, Talia was gifted a compact little hatchback with a bow tied across the hood. I received an envelope with a typed note about self-reliance and a folded pamphlet on financial responsibility. Talia crashed her car 6 weeks later, scraped both sides against a concrete column because she took a corner too fast. Somehow, the blame fell on me. You should have taught her better, Lionel said, disappointment sharpening every syllable. Even though I had never once been allowed behind the wheel with her. That pattern continued through every milestone. In high school, I entered robotics competitions, built small security programs, and won a scholarship. My mother stored my plaques in a drawer to keep the hallway tidy. Meanwhile, Talia's gymnastics medals glimmered along the main staircase, displayed where every guest could admire them by the time I left for university. The imbalance was so ingrained it had stopped hurting. It simply became the weather of my life, predictable, inescapable, rarely questioned. Now, years later, their messages still carried the same tone. Lionel's sharp expectation, Talia's casual entitlement, the unspoken rule that I existed primarily to fill gaps, to fix things, to absorb fallout. I walked into the kitchen and set my phone face down on the counter. The screen pulsed with unread notifications. Outside, a soft layer of snow dusted the balcony railing, catching faint reflections of streetlights. Inside, the apartment felt clean, deliberate, untouched by their chaos, calm enough to hear the thoughts I had spent years pushing aside. I brewed tea, not because I wanted it, but because the ritual steadied me. Steam curled upward, blurring the edges of the world for a moment. When I finally lifted my phone again, I scrolled through the family thread, all of them laughing, plates full, soft candlelight, and then my empty seat like a blank accusation. The ache that rose in me wasn't sadness, it was recognition. They didn't forget me. They planned around my absence. The thought landed cleanly, without pain. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen washed the kitchen in pale blue. My financial accounts loaded one after another, numbers built through years of contracts, late nights, and weekends I had spent alone, while they assumed I was dabbling in tech nonsense. They had no idea what I had built. They never asked. I clicked on the car invoice. The repair shop had attached every document. The car was titled under Tolia and my father. My name appeared nowhere. I opened a notebook and wrote, vehicle damage. 31,900 registered owners. Talia Vallon. Lionel Vallon requested paya. Me without consent. I turned the page. Winter dinner. Rescheduled without notice. Message sent after event. Began pattern. Consistent participation optional. Contribution mandatory. I stared at the words. They looked clinical, factual, and somehow, that made them land harder. I could pay the bill. I could smooth things over again. I could pretend this time was just another repetition of old roles. But something in me, something long neglected, refused. The bank number on the invoice blinked like a dare. I tapped it. A gentle, automated voice answered, followed by a representative. How may I help you today? I need to report a vehicle for collection, I said, my voice steady. The loan holders have defaulted. The representative asked for verification. I provided everything the shop had attached. When she asked my relationship to the borrowers, I answered plainly, I have none. They assume I will fix the situation for them. I won't. There was a soft silence. Then she continued processing the request. When she confirmed that the vehicle would be collected within 24 hours, I thanked her and ended the call. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Next, I drafted an email addressed to Lionel, with copies to Orla and Talia. The words came easily. I won't be covering the repair costs. This responsibility belongs to the listed owners. Please address it directly. I read it twice, checking for emotion. There was none, only truth. Then I hit send. The quiet afterward was nearly physical. I closed the laptop and leaned against the counter, staring at the small reflection in the dark window, my own face, steadier than I remembered it. The next morning, sunlight crept across the kitchen like a slow reveal. My phone buzzed nonstop. I made coffee before touching it. Only when I was ready did I open the messages. Lionel's voice filled the first voicemail, contained fury, wrapped tightly around brittle pride. Return my call. The second came minutes later. Your behavior is unacceptable. The third, there is an issue with the car. Respond now. I deleted them all. Talea's text came next. Frantic, inconsistent, blaming. They came to the house. They're towing it. What did you do? You made this worse. Fix it now. I placed the phone screen down again. Around noon, another text arrived from an unknown number. A photo of their driveway. 2 workers securing Talia's car onto the back of a transport truck. Talia stood on the porch, barefoot in pajamas, arms crossed and face twisted into disbelief. Lionel stood behind her, phone to his ear, jaw tight enough to shatter. His expression seemed to be aimed directly at me. Then, a final message. Call us now. I didn't dot at the office. I moved through meetings with unusual clarity. Colleagues greeted me, unaware of the storm orbiting my phone. My co-founder, Eris, raised a brow when he saw my expression. Long morning. Just overdue decisions, I said. He nodded, understanding more than I said. The hours passed without me checking my messages again. Not because I was avoiding them, because I no longer felt obligated to respond. But around sunset, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. My office door pushed open. Lionel walked in first. Storm held barely at bay. Talia followed, her eyes red from anger rather than tears. Orla came last, quiet and small beside them. Without waiting to be invited, Lionel said, "We need to settle this situation immediately." I stayed seated. "There's nothing to settle. You had no right to interfere," he snapped. "That was our matter. Family handles things privately." "Family includes people," I replied calmly, "not just their wallets." Orla winced. Talia shifted, her glare sharp. "Call the bank," Lionel ordered. "Tell them you made a mistake." I looked at him, really, looked and saw something I hadn't recognized before. For years, he assumed my compliance was loyalty. But it had been fear, habit, conditioning. Those things were gone now. "I'm not fixing what isn't mine," I said. Lionel's expression flickered into something unguarded confusion maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "This is disgraceful," he muttered. "This is overdue," I replied. For the first time in my life, he had no immediate response. The silence between us stretched thin. Finally, he turned stiffly and left the room. Talia followed, collecting her resentment around her like a coat. Orla lingered a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. "I only wanted to be sure you weren't hurt." "I'm fine," I said gently. She nodded and closed the door behind her. The office felt enormously quiet when they were gone. That night, back home, I stood on my balcony with a cup of tea and watched the city lights scatter across the river. No messages came, no missed calls, just the hum of traffic below and the cool wind against my face. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment, it felt like permission. Permission to breathe, permission to breathe, permission to choose, permission to live a life that didn't require shrinking. People believe the hardest part is walking away. It isn't. The hardest part is seeing clearly the weight you carried for so long that you mistook it for your own. I stayed on the balcony until my tea cooled, until the sky darkened, until the world below blurred into soft motion. When I finally stepped inside, closing the glass door behind me, the small click of the latch felt final in a way nothing else ever had. And for the first time in my adult life, I didn't feel alone. I felt free. The next morning arrived without urgency. No vibrating phone, no flashing notifications, no demands waiting at the edge of consciousness. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't bracing for something before my feet even touched the floor. The quiet wasn't empty, it was steady, strong. Like a room finally cleared of clutter, I stayed in bed longer than usual, listening to the soft hum of the radiator, the faint crackling of the old building waking up. Outside, the streets of Portbridge were wrapped in a pale winter haze. A thin frost clung to the rooftops, glittering faintly as the sun pushed its way into view. It was a morning that felt like it belonged to someone else, someone unburdened, someone allowed to breathe before the world made its demands. Then, almost on cue, my phone lit up. But it wasn't my family this time. It was Eris. "Can you stop by the office early? Something came in. Important." I dressed slowly, pulling on a dark sweater, boots still cold from the night before. The air outside carried that crisp metallic smell of winter storms waiting beyond the horizon. As I walked toward the tram stop, I realized my shoulders weren't tense, my thoughts weren't spiraling, my chest wasn't tight with the expectation of conflict. It was strange how quickly peace could settle once the noise was gone. The ride to the office was quiet. I watched the morning commuters, some briskly efficient, others half awake and clutching steaming paper cups. None of them looked like people who had repossessed their sister's car the day before. They looked normal, uncomplicated. I wondered what that felt like. When I reached the office, the main lobby lights were still dim. Only the security desk was occupied. The guard nodded at me. "You're in early today." "Couldn't sleep," I lied. He didn't press further. Upstairs, the engineering floor was silent except for the low whir of servers. Eris stood by the glass wall of the conference room, hands in his pockets, expression unusually tense. "What happened?" I asked. He motioned me inside. On the table sat a thick envelope paper, not digital. My name was written across the front in handwriting. I recognized Orla's. My chest tightened with something I didn't want to call dread. Eris watched me. "A courier delivered it at 7, said your mother requested it be sent before 8. I swallowed, pulled out a chair, and sat. Slowly, I opened the envelope. The faint scent of my parents' house cedar, lemon oil, and old paper brushed against me before I even saw the contents. Inside were 3 letters, one from Orla, one from Lionel, one from Talia. I opened my mother's first. "My dearest Rowan, I know you may not want to hear from me right now, but I need to say this. I'm sorry. I should have spoken up years ago. I should have protected you from the roles forced onto you. You didn't deserve any of it. Please don't think you owe us anything. I only need to know that you are safe. Love, Mum." The handwriting trembled at the edges, as if she had written the letter in several attempts. I sat quietly, letting the weight of it settle. I had waited years, decades, to hear something like that, and yet it didn't feel triumphant. It felt soft, unexpected. I set it aside and opened Lionel's. The words were sharp, even on paper. "Rowan, you have created unnecessary chaos. Family matters should be handled within the family. This situation reflects poorly on all of us. I expect you to correct it. Bella." No apology, no acknowledgement, no understanding, only expectation. Wearing the costume of authority, I placed Lionel's letter beside Orla. The contrast almost absurd. Then came Talia's. Her handwriting was dramatic, looping, impatient. Seriously, you didn't have to do that. The whole neighborhood saw the tow truck. Dad is livid. You made a mess of everything. I don't know why you'd want to embarrass us like that. The familiar sting of accusation flickered for a moment, but only a moment. It no longer had a place to root itself. I leaned back in the chair and exhaled slowly. Eris watched my face carefully. Do you want to talk about it? No, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. I'm done talking about them. He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. But the day had other plans. Just as I folded the letters, my phone buzzed again, a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would ignore it, but something instinct maybe told me to pick up. Hello, a man's voice responded. Older.com, unfamiliar. Is this Rowan Vallon? Yes, my name is Inspector Ult. I'm calling from the Portbridge Public Safety Division. I'm hoping to ask you a few questions regarding an incident reported this morning. My fingers tightened around the phone. What incident? He paused, choosing his words carefully. Your father filed a complaint. Of course he did. Eris watched me, eyebrows lifting slightly in concern. What kind of complaint? I asked. Financial misconduct, Inspector Aldrin replied. He alleges you intentionally interfered with a loan agreement connected to your sister's vehicle. I laughed once, quiet, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity finally exposed itself fully. I didn't interfere with anything, I said. I simply refused to pay for something that wasn't mine. Are you available to give a statement today? The inspector asked. I can come now. Eris put one hand on the back of my chair. You don't have to go alone, he whispered. I covered the phone speaker and looked at him. It's fine. It's not, he said quietly, but I still went. The walk to the public safety building was brisk. The winter sun hung low, casting long shadows across the pavement. Inside, the lobby was warm and smelled faintly of old coffee. A receptionist guided me to a small interview room where Inspector Aldrin waited, silver-haired, composed, the kind of man who seemed more observant than he appeared. He gestured for me to sit. Thank you for coming in. I didn't want anything to look evasive, I said. He nodded approvingly. Good, let's keep this straightforward. He asked for my version. I told him everything, not in anger, not with theatrics, but with clarity. And as I spoke, I saw something shift in his expression. Recognition, understanding, maybe even sympathy. When I finished, he folded his hands over his notebook. Thank you. Based on what you've described and the documentation you provided, you have done nothing illegal. The responsibility lies exclusively with the vehicle's registered owners. I exhaled. But, he added gently, your father seems to believe you acted out of spite. I paused, then said, I acted out of self-respect. He gave a small, approving nod. Regardless, there will be no further investigation. I will close the complaint today. I felt something loosen inside my chest. Not I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. As I stood to leave, he said, for what it's worth, you made the right boundary. Some families misunderstand strength when it comes from silence. I didn't respond. I simply walked out into the cold air, letting the wind sting my cheeks until the last traces of tension dissolved. Back at the office, Eris was waiting. Well, he asked. It's over, I said. He smiled, but gently, a knowing smile. Good, he said. Then maybe now you can start living a life that isn't just reactive. The idea sounded foreign, strange, almost too large to hold. A life built on choice, not expectation. The rest of the day passed without event. I worked, I ate, I went home. Small, unremarkable things, but they felt different now, untangled, free. I reached my apartment door and paused before unlocking it. For the first time, the silence inside wasn't something to brace against, it was something to step into. And I did. The apartment felt unusually warm when I stepped inside, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath and finally released it. I hung my coat by the door and loosened the scarf around my neck. The air smelled faintly of cedar from the candles I'd burned the night before. Calm, rooted, my space. I placed my phone on the kitchen counter. No messages, no missed calls. For once, the empty screen didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a clean slate. I poured water into a kettle, letting the quiet fill the room. My reflection shimmered faintly in the window vague, soft-edged, unfamiliar, in a strangely comforting way. It looked like someone easing into a life they finally recognized. Just as the kettle began to hum, a knock sounded at the door. Not a frantic knock, not angry, just firm, deliberate. I froze. No one ever visited unannounced. I walked to the peephole, expecting maybe a delivery I forgot about, or a neighbor with a misplaced package, but instead, I saw a figure wearing a burgundy wool coat, dark hair pulled back neatly, posture rigid with formality. It was my mother. My breath stilled. For a moment I considered not opening the door, but something softened in me, teeny, fragile, curious. I unlocked the door. "Hi, Mom." She stood there holding a thermos in both hands, like she needed something to anchor herself. Her eyes clear green, always softer than she let on, lifted to mine. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside. She walked into the apartment as though crossing unfamiliar terrain, looking around at everything with a startled kind of awe, as if she hadn't fully believed I had built a life outside the one she managed. She set the thermos on the coffee table and removed her gloves with slow, careful movements. "I didn't call," she said, "because I wasn't sure you would answer." "You're right," I admitted. "I probably wouldn't have." She nodded, absorbing the truth instead of resisting it. That alone felt like a small miracle. "I brought you this," she said, opening the thermos. "It's the tea you liked when you were younger, the one with hibiscus and mint." I remembered it, the rare evenings when she would make it for me after school, when Dad was still at work and the house felt lighter. She poured a cup and handed it to me. I didn't know what she wanted. A conversation, forgiveness, a chance to explain the decades of quiet compliance that shaped my childhood. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she sat on the edge of the couch, folded her hands, and looked at me with a grief I had never seen. "I should have protected you," she whispered. The words landed like a sudden gust, but knocking something loose inside me. She continued, voice trembling. "I should have made space for you to be seen, to be valued." Her gaze dropped to her lap. "Your father, he is who he is, but I allowed his expectations to shape you more than they ever should have." I said nothing. The silence wasn't avoidance, it was listening. "Your sister didn't learn entitlement on her own," she added, her voice barely audible. "She learned it by watching who we rallied around and who we overlooked." I felt the truth of it settle slowly around us, like dust drifting downward. "I failed you," she said. I closed my eyes for a long moment, not because the words hurt, but because they were years too late yet strangely needed. When I opened them again, she was looking at me, waiting for something she wasn't sure she deserved. "Why come now?" I asked. "Because yesterday I realized you were done," she said, her voice cracked in the middle. "You've stepped out of the pattern we all depended on, and I didn't want you to think you had to step alone." I didn't know how to respond. For so long, I had instinctively guarded myself around her softness, unsure if it hid loyalty to me or simply fear of Lionel. But she wasn't hiding now. "When your father saw the car being taken, he said some unkind things," she said. "Things I've heard my whole life, things I've let pass without question." She swallowed hard. "But when he spoke about you, as though you were property that disobeyed," her eyes glistened. Something in me broke. The air tightened around us. "I can't stay with him," she whispered. I blinked. "What?" Her hands twisted together. Small, nervous movements, not after seeing how he reacted, not after realizing how easily he erases people who stop obeying. The kettle clicked off behind me, unnoticed until now. She inhaled shakily. "I came to tell you I'm leaving him." The room became impossibly still. I searched her face for hesitation, doubt, the kind of wavering she had always lived with, but there was none. Only exhaustion, and a small spark of something like resolve. "Where will you go?" I asked quietly. "For now, I don't know," she said, "but I know where I can't stay." She looked at me with such earnestness that I felt my chest tighten. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I see it now." She hesitated. "I see you." A warmth rose unexpectedly in my throat. Not relief, not forgiveness, something gentler, something tentative. I sat beside her. "You don't owe me an apology," I said. "Not anymore. Just honesty." Tears slipped down her cheek, quiet, unforced. She brushed them away, almost embarrassed. "I'll try," she whispered. We sat in shared silence, sipping tea that tasted like childhood rewritten, less sweet, more real. Outside the window, light snow began to fall, tracing delicate patterns down the glass dot. After a long moment, she said, "Your father will keep calling. He won't accept no. He never has." "I know," I said. "You need to be careful," she added. "He doesn't lose gracefully." "I'm not fighting him," I replied. "I'm stepping back." She looked at me with something like pride, a rare expression on her face. "Then I'll step back with you." Eventually, she stood, Gathering her gloves, she paused at the door. "You're stronger than you think," she said softly. "I only wish I'd learned from you sooner." When the door closed, I stood there in the quiet, the faint warmth of her presence still lingering. I realized something then. I hadn't just freed myself, I had opened a door she never knew she could walk through, and that mattered more than anything else.